which means tourism that can continue to grow and develop. We have had of terminologies coming out lately that we just don't need to build back better. We need to build back fairer. But we are also saying at STAS2021 that it is time to build tourism forward. We know that tourism is important, and its importance is evident in all the data that we see, particularly the numeric economic data that is used to measure the performance of tourism. But today we are also gathered here to say that it is not enough for tourism to be important. Tourism must have measurable performance in all spheres, not just economic data. It should measure the quality of life, of biodiversity, the quality of life of communities. We should measure the happiness index of communities that host tourism. As the world goes through distress and tourism is distressed by COVID-19, we have seen a lot of economic data on what is happening with tourism numbers and tourism arrivals. Nobody is measuring the social well-being of communities that have been made to depend on tourism. And I am using the word have been made deliberately, because there are circumstances when communities have not chosen tourism. The destinations and the policies have chosen them for tourism. And therefore they have changed their lifestyles, they have abandoned some livelihoods, and they have become dependent on tourism. The measurement of the well-being of these communities at this time is not coming to the front. And so as we gather here today at STAS 2021, I want us to think about responsible restart of tourism. And the responsible restart of tourism is informed by the fact that tourism has strong connections with developments in many parts of Africa. Today, we even know that there are synergies between tourism and public health because of COVID-19. And so we are saying that probably it is time that we have epidemiological indicators for tourism and destination well-being. But having said that, so how do we restart tourism responsibly? And I will share with us 4 thoughts from Sustainable Travel and Tourism Agenda. We are saying that if we are going to restart tourism responsibly, we are going to take cognizance of climate reality. Before COVID-19, climate was already a crisis. We are on the verge of a breakthrough of addressing COVID-19 with the vaccines, but climate reality remains with us. So starting tourism responsibly also means that we have to acknowledge that there were other crises that could affect tourism in the long term if we do not address them. So we must take climate reality seriously as we restart tourism. We are also saying that we need, number 2, we need to repurpose tourism as an enabler of sustainable development in destinations. This means that we need to leverage tourism direct and multiplier effects on other sectors so that we can build stronger ties with communities, we can build an inclusive industry, we can support very small and medium enterprises to blossom in tourism. We can be deliberate about revenue retention in destination. We can be deliberate about supporting local investments in tourism. and we can be deliberate about developing domestic tourism. This is what I mean by repurposing tourism as an enabler of sustainable development in destinations. Number three, as we go forward, as we restart tourism responsibly, we must consolidate regional partnerships. We know that people will travel locally and regionally as we start. We must prepare for them. Africa has a youthful traveling population. Is tourism ready for them? So when I talk about consolidating regional partnership, I am talking about using immediate available resources that can be used to boost tourism as we restart tourism. Number four, I believe that it is time, as we start tourism responsibly, to pursue long-term goals along the short-term recovery plans. We have seen a lot of short-term recovery plans coming out of governments and policymakers. But as we look at those short-term recovery plans, we must pursue long-term goals for the industry. And the long-term goals will mean addressing everything else that I have mentioned under repurposing tourism, including things like climate reality, including starting to include public health seriously in tourism regulations and policies, and in a different way. This is the four ways we believe that it is important to start tourism in a responsible way. But at the end of it all, we need to balance investments in tourism. And I'm saying this for Africa. We must balance investments in tourism. We must know where our strengths lie. We must work to minimize. You cannot build resilience without minimizing all your risks. It has been risky to run a seasonal sector. Running a seasonal sector has proved to be risky. We must find a way of minimizing this risk of running a seasonal industry. We must minimize the risk of overdependence on certain markets and broaden our markets by designing products that are relevant for our available and immediate markets. We have lined up in the next 2 days a very admirable list of speakers who are accomplished in their own fields, where they will be sharing with us their expertise and their experiences. Some of them, most of them, come from academic backgrounds. And so I am excited that we will be talking science, and not science in the way of a classroom, because they've been able to advise, and some of them work very closely with the private sector. So we are happy that we are not going to be presenting what we have heard, but we are going to be hearing a lot of what has been proven through research and good science for that matter. So I welcome you once again, and hope that you will stay with us in the next 2 days so that we can use this opportunity together. One of our statements for STAS 2021 is that in times of crisis, we gather. In times of plenty, we gather, so that we can always be prepared. So it is another opportunity to gather in the next 2 days so that we can work together at business level to build resilience, at country level to build resilience, at regional level for Africa to build resilience as we go forward. So allow me now to introduce to you our speakers for this morning. Our sessions are structured into 3 sections. So we have a morning session that ends at about 12 o'clock. That just gives us 2.5 hours. Then we start again at 2 and we end at 4:30. And I hope you can join us. We allowed for that break because staying in webinars for more than that time continuously is not good even for our mental health. So we hope you will log in again for the next session. So coming up next is Dr. Anne-Kathrin. Dr. Anne-Kathrin is from the long run, preferred by nature. I know she will describe to us what the long run is, but in short, long run is an organization that works with the destinations to build strong sustainability brands. And they anchor resilience of places and biodiversity areas on sustainability. But she will tell us more about that. So this morning, Anne will be talking to us, Anne-Kathrin will be talking to us about harnessing resilience through the 4 Cs, and she will explain what those 4 Cs are in just a little bit. She will be followed by Rose Mukogo. Rose is from Zimbabwe. She works with the climate travel, friendly travel and climate friendly registry. It is a very important opportunity for tourism through the registry to document our emissions and work towards zero emissions by 2050. So Anne will be sharing with us a practical tool and how the industry and businesses can be part of this registry. Later on, we will hear from Velma Kiome from Saffir Africa. She's the head of operations and design. And Velma will be talking to us about shaping and positioning Brand Africa. We've heard about Brand Africa for a while now, but this agenda is not moving forward. And so we will be looking forward to hear from Velma how this agenda can be moved forward and why it is important. And last for this morning, we will hear from Dr. Julia Albrecht from University of Otago in New Zealand. And she will be talking to us about a novel area in engaging travelers in sustainable tourism. She will be talking about visitor pledges. How do we convert our travelers and visitors to destinations, enable them to make commitments, and then turn that around as an opportunity to market our destinations? Dr. Julia is an accomplished author in tourism, and she's going to share with us maybe a link to her latest publication that she has edited so that we can learn more about her area of expertise. So without taking more time, now allow me to invite Dr. Anne-Kathrin from the long run. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Judy, for your amazing welcome to your conference and for sharing your thoughts. I think you have mentioned very many important things, and as I'm sure between myself and the other speakers today and tomorrow, we will only reiterate what you've been saying. I think the one thing that struck me is about how important it is to gather. And I think for us, that has also been a key thing always for the long run, but especially last year in 2020, where we ended up actually spending over 200 hours on Zoom calls with our members around the world to be there for each other in times of crisis, so that we can get through this together. So that really struck with me, and because it's also been something that's very important. But in the presentation, and I will keep it short because I can see also with the time, I've been asked to talk a little bit more about the long run and how we've been working with our members who are all tourism and conservation-based organizations around the world, how we've been working with them over the last 10 years to really integrate sustainability into their business operations in a holistic approach to make their operations and their projects and activities more resilient. So first one about harnessing resilience. I think, again, as Judy said, it's 2020. As we all agree, it brought tourism to a standstill and in a way and magnitude that nobody could have envisaged or anticipated. I think, when I look at the members we have all around the world, some were very fortunate. They were able to reopen fairly soon because of a strong domestic market. Others to date have not reopened. But, looking at the bright side of things, what we are really celebrating, that none of our members cease their work when it comes to the 4 Cs. So this is work that they're carrying out in conservation, in community, culture, and commerce, ultimately. And here really that they have actually more than anything expanded their work in many, many areas, which we are very, very proud of. The key thing though that I think it has taught us is and highlighted to us how important it is for creating a business resilience and a sustainability to have a very holistic approach to what we do and how we do it, and to have that long-term vision. It is important to consider today, and it's important that we look at this year, but it's equally important to see where do we want to go in 3 years, where do we want to achieve in 5 years, and what is our 100-year vision for ourselves as our business, but also the ecosystem and the communities that we are part of. The other thing I think 2020 also highlighted to the long run and our members was the importance of having integrity and being very transparent about what we do and how we do things. Because I think, especially with travelers, there's more and more demand now for sustainability, for regenerative, transformative, meaningful experience, especially now that travel is slowly resuming in certain areas of the world. But it also means there's more and more greenwashing. More and more people are suddenly doing lots of different things, but how honest and how transparent are they really about what is going on? And it's important to keep raising the bar. It's a journey. Resilience is not achieved like sustainability or regeneration today. It is something that we have to continuously strive for and work towards. And the other key thing is we are all part of the tourism value chain. So we have a role to play to be agents of change in that and encourage others that may not have understood the importance of sustainability or regeneration, and encourage them to do so, because then we can become more resilient as a whole around the world. So as I it's looking at sustainability in a holistic approach of conservation, of community, of culture, and of commerce. And this is really about integrating sustainability review of your business and seeing how are we excelling in certain aspects, because we are all good at some things. It may be our community engagement, it may be our financial bottom line, but having that approach of looking at all the different aspects, the ecosystem we depend on, where we are sending our guests to, or the community that we are part of and that our staff come from, is equally as important. So having that holistic approach is essential. And the other aspect is also looking at all the different things that we are doing. What impact do they have? Do they actually have a net positive impact? Or are we assuming some of this? Have we actually looked into the impact of it? How have we benchmarked it against others? Are we monitoring how these activities or projects are going, so that we can ensure that this work that we are carrying out or we are supporting is actually having the impact that we as the business or destination aspires for, but also the community or the stakeholders that you are engaging in. And last but not least, I think for us, it's really important to look at the bigger picture. We always encourage our members to do that as part of the journey of continuous improvement. It's important to look in to make sure that our house is in order, that we are sustainable, but equally important, it's to look outward. It's to become those change makers in the landscape and in the communities that you're part of. Because if you want to improve and protect ecosystems for posterity, and also have sustainable livelihoods and help community and make them more resilient, we need to ensure that we look both inwards and outwards. So when it comes to the members of the long run, for all of us, we agree that it's really key that we need to start acting today for a better tomorrow. So the long run, we are a membership organization, as Judy said, and here it's really about bringing together passionate people that want to create very positive impact through their nature-based tourism business. It's about demonstrating to everybody else that tourism has a role to play when it comes to sustainability. We can have a positive impact and we can drive change. So with the members, for example, our members protect over 23 million acres of land and support or impact over 750,000 people. It's, and we have 40 people that the number is comprised of. So just imagine if we would put the whole tourism industry together, we know the impact that can have. And it's really important though to leverage that. You know, we all have already experience at hand where we are excelling, where we are exceeding. So we have created a community where we are supporting our members on that journey, and we are connecting them, and we are inspiring each other, but also others outside of it, to make sure that we continuously can drive sustainability, stay innovative, and really push for what could be next, so that we can create those resilient businesses over time. We also, you know, benchmarking is an important aspect as well. It's like, you know, everybody can say, I do lots of amazing things, but what are we measuring against? So we have created a standard that we are using as a framework to guide our members' journey, and that we are just using to see where were they at, where did they want to go, and how can we guide them along this way. Because it's important to have something to strive for, but also then to recognize our journey never stops. It is something that will continuously go on, because, you know, things are constantly changing and the world is evolving, and so are we. And the other thing is what we've also happened to us last year is we are now hosted by Preferred by Nature, which is one of the largest environmental standard agency, which is a Danish NGO. Because for us, what we also always learned, there's a lot of things we can learn from other industries, whether that's agriculture, whether that's forestry or otherwise. There's a lot of knowledge and expertise that the tourism industry can learn from, to innovate and to change and have that positive impact. And for us to be hosted by an organization like that is really amazing, because we can bring in those new knowledge and expertise into the community. So earlier on, I talked about the value chain, the tourism value chain. And here also, just to mention briefly how we work with our members. So we have different ways members are engaging. We have fellow members who eventually become global ecosphere retreats, which are all tourism enterprises who have a physical presence and protect landscapes and seascapes for posterity. Then we have affiliate members who have external knowledge and expertise. So this could be architects, there could be experts in solar, there could be designers, they could be researchers or otherwise. But they have important knowledge and expertise that they bring to the community to ensure that our tourism businesses, which is the core of our membership, continuously learn, innovate, rethink, and reconsider what they are doing and what else could we be doing, so that that continuous journey is always supported. And then we're also working with travel partners, travel designers, tour operators, because we also realized it's an important part of the value chain to consider and to actively engage. There's a huge demand amongst them to be more sustainable themselves, but also to, one, promote sustainable destinations, but those even who are not yet sustainable, there's a point where they can just start. And we have integrated them, and more it's been very helpful for us to get their perspective and to close the loop. Because the more travel partners and designers are inspired by sustainability and understand it, the more business we can drive to our members and all the other sustainable destinations around the world, to make sure that the work and the impact that the people have can be celebrated and supported. So the way we have really set out the work that we are doing all helps our members to integrate sustainability and work towards greater resilience. This is about sharing best practice. This is about, you know, discussing how can we have more transformative experience. This is also about benchmarking and standards and helping people understand, again, where am I now? Where am I going to go? And how do I compare to others within our community? And it's important to look at all the different aspects, because in order to be resilient, we can't do it alone. I think it's important to be part of something and to share it, whether that's your local community, whether it's an association, or whether that's just your neighboring landowner in our case, and sometimes. But the key is there's a lot of things we can learn from each other. And if we don't have to reinvent the wheel, but rather learn from those things and continuously push and innovate, then we can really drive that change. So just going back to the 4C framework, for us, this is really the basis for everything that we do and for our work, because we learned that with sustainability and resilience, it's important to look at it from all the different aspects. If you truly want the sustainability to embed into operations and in your decision making, it can't be an add-on. It can't be the nice thing to have that you just do on an ad hoc basis here and there. One has to think about what do I want to achieve? Where do I want to go? Where does my business want to have a desired impact? And where does my community and the community and the nature we are surrounded by will look like in 5, 10, 50 or 100 years? So it's encouraging people and working with people to slowly integrate sustainability so it becomes core of your operations and it's considered into everything that you're doing, because the more we can do that, the more resilient the business will become. The one point I also highlight here is about commerce. Commerce and strengthening that is really important because financial sustainability goes hand in hand with resilience. And we need money and financial resources to secure biodiversity and also support the well-being of people in the long term. It does not go without it. That doesn't mean that it should compromise our work in any of the other areas in conservation, community, and culture. And there are ways to think about it and structure it, but I think COVID especially has brought to the fore the importance to rethink how we work and how we operate, how we make money and how we spend money and do those things in order to ensure that we can be more resilient in times of crisis. And last but not least, it's also about balance. You know, it is amazing if we are excelling in our community engagement, but if the environment that we are surrounded by is getting devastated as a result, then it is not sustainable. We have to celebrate our cultures, our cultural values, and support cultural change rather than forcing a change that may not be wanted by communities, and to make sure that all of these aspects then are in balance. So I've then just pulled out a few examples from our members about the 2020 and how, you know, how they've been faring, but also how important resilience and thinking about resilience and sustainability has been for them. I think we all know that, you know, with community conservancies, it's been a very sustainable model when it comes to wildlife conservation in Kenya and also beyond. But I think it also showed in 2020 how important it is that we reconsider the tourism conservation value chain and really see and how we can optimize that to increase resilience of those communities and of the conservation work. I think here the key is also about considering how can we diversify our income stream as tourism operators. Some of our members already have multiple income streams, so they are more resilient as a result of it. Those who solely rely on tourism have been much more at risk. However, some of our members have been very successful because they have created endowment funds, trusts, or other financial mechanisms to leverage the money that they may have generated from tourism in the years where business was very good, and now sustain them, their conservation and their community work in times of crisis. And it's important that we increasingly look into mechanisms to make sure that we can sustain our work within all of those different areas and our own operations and sustainability going forward. The other aspect as well is that I think that COVID has really highlighted many environmental truths and also questions. I think, you know, as Judy said, you know, the climate crisis and the climate emergency, all of these things are much more the forefront of people's mind. It was before, but it is definitely is now. And I think the key is also for all of us to ensure that, you know, strong environmental management is really important for our resilience. There is a strong cost-saving perspective that we can make that actually has made people survive the crisis just because their baseline consumption of their operations has been so low that they didn't have to lay off staff because they had the resources to put into staff well-being, staff salaries, and even before that, enhance the quality of services, the experiences, and the business success because they had saved in areas where it ultimately there is a cost saving as possible. And environmental management with water, energy, and waste has a huge saving. And the money that can be saved can then also go to the amazing work that people are doing within their operations and beyond. So in the case of Borano, for example, the mobile clinic that serves over 700 people each month in rural communities, which was essential in the time of COVID. Just as another example with Rotbos in South Africa, another member, I think here the key point I would like to highlight is how important it is to have a genuine commitment to your community, to work with them, to be part of them, to understand their needs and work with them. Because in times of crisis like last year, you know, at Rotbos, they had a very strict lockdown in South Africa from March. So all this, lots of jobs, over 2 million jobs got lost, schools closed, huge unemployment rates. And then suddenly the local communities in the townships there and also in other areas of Africa struggled to find money as to, you know, how am I feeding my family? So Rotbos, which now normally they have very strong community work, but they transformed the early learning facilities and other training activities they would normally do into a feeding scheme, where they were then providing over 300,000 meals to their local community. So the staff that were before working in conservation, that were hockey trainers or engaged in sport, all became part of this, you know, of the community support because they had those understanding with the community. The community trusted them and they've been working with them. So they've been really essential in the survival of their community during this time of crisis. The other aspects, as again, which I'm sure we all agree, is that, you know, protecting nature will never be sustainable if we don't engage the people that we live with and are surrounded by. I think, you know, their well-being, their empowerment, their development, it all relies on it. But I think it is key. Tourism cannot be only the driver for conservation. In the case though of Wolverdens in Namibia, another member of ours, I think here, again, the great thing has been they have managed to set aside resources over the last few years from the conservation levies that they've secured and not spent or only sustainably and responsibly spent to get through this crisis. So their core activity, which is the Desert Academy, which is a vocational training center for tourism and hospitality, has remained open this entire time, despite tourism being closed and not a single cent being earned from tourism. And Stefan and his team have really worked hard to look at how and been thinking about how should tourism work? Like, how should we have to rethink it? Who should it work for? And how do we define success? It can't just be the bottom line. So they have been working on a practical framework, which they call the Arid Eden Project, about creating a more sustainable, a more resilient and inclusive tourism going forward that helps restart those local economies, but also that goes away from this passive consumption to much more of an active engagement, being part of the experiences as a guest, but also connecting this head, hand, and heart to make it much more meaningful and impactful. And last but not least, another thing that lots of our members are engaged in, we have hubs all around the world with our members where we connect them on also very practical things. And here, for example, in the East African hub, which is mainly our Kenyan members, we've been focusing a lot about the supply chain, greening our supply chain. And there's a lot of opportunity that exists by working together, leveraging our businesses and, you know, seeing what is possible. Because the less reliant we are on international freight, the more sustainable we become. You know, we can have better relationships with our suppliers, reduce our waste, and then also provide a better quality system. So working with others around these things, again, is really important to us and also to our members to see how can we make it more sustainable, but in all the different aspects. So again, you know, what is next for us when it comes to resilience, when it comes to sustainability? And I think over the last 10 years, we've learned as the long run, but also as a member, our journey doesn't stop. We also have to continuously innovate and change. And again, 2020 in that regard highlighted for us some key aspects which we are now focusing on. And one is for sure resilience and resource efficiency. Even before COVID came or hit the world, we were a founding signature of Tourism Declares a Climate Emergency, because it is hugely important to tackle the biodiversity and the climate crisis. and resource consumption is a key part of it. So we've been working with our members to create a resource consumption and dashboard to help them understand where they're at the moment, so we can assess where are the opportunities for you to reduce your negative impact and save costs at the same time. And we are actually now working on the 2.0 version of that to make it more of a monthly calculator that people can use so that they can track their consumption, see the opportunities, and take actions. And we are actually being very fortunate. We got a grant from GIZ, and we will also do some training on resource consumption when it comes to energy and water this year, which will be great. But also for our members, it has been very good to be able to benchmark their consumption and their work against each other, because once we understood where everybody's at, we are able to now pick out examples of best practice, whether that's water, energy, waste, and the different aspects within it, and leverage those examples to showcase to others what is possible, where do you start, and how can you do it, so that we can improve together over time. The other thing is going also beyond carbon offsetting. I think carbon offsets has been for a while, proposed as a solution to mitigate some environmental costs. But as many or all of you probably know and agree, it has also a lot of problems that come with it. So we've been working with our travel partners and travel designers to rethink how this could work, and trying to see whether we can come up with a traveler donation schemes that still enables traveler to mitigate the negative impacts from their travel, but actually connects them to meaningful and impactful projects on the ground that are related to carbon, to communities, and to conservation, but that are trustworthy and where the money actually goes to have that impact, to able to minimize the costs. The other thing, again, as I mentioned earlier, I think 2020 highlighted that sustainability, there's an interest, there's a greater desire for more responsible, regenerative, sustainable, meaningful, transformative experience for travelers. But with that, there's also more greenwashing, as I said. More and more people are suddenly doing all of these amazing things. What is reality? I sometimes don't know. So what we realized also, it is important that we support our members to differentiate and distinguish themselves with their commitment, their investments and impacts, by breaking down, where does the money go? Where does the money go if people travel to your destinations? Is it going in employment? Is it going in the services or products that you're using locally? Is it in the conservation, community, or culture work? Where does it go? Just to be transparent about what it is and stand up for where we are strong at and where there is also room for improvement. And last but not least, for us, it's again more demonstrating that positive impact. Our members, with them protecting landscapes and seascapes for posterity, there's a huge assumed positive impact in the carbon that is sequestered in those landscapes and through the conservation work that they do. But we realized that in order to substantiate that, we are trying to develop an ecosystem value and biodiversity index to really demonstrate to the world that, again, tourism can be that driver for change. It can protect landscapes and seascapes, and that can be sustainable and have that positive impact. So this is really it for me, and I really appreciate you listening. I hope it sets the scene for it, and I'm sure there will be a lot of amazing presentations to come. I think for me, the key thing in a way to take home also from the experience we had with our members last year, sustainability does make business sense. I think it really strengthens the resilience. None of our members have folded their business. They continued their work within the 4 Cs. Through many sacrifices, maybe, but because they have that strong commitment and a strong belief that what they're doing is the right thing. And it also then had that marketing effect and that branding, because they're truly sustainable or trying to achieve where they are. And they're standing up for what they are and what they're not. And that is really important.
Thank you very much, Dr. Anne-Kathrin, for that introduction to our 7th Sustainable Tourism Africa Summit. Really, the purpose of having the objective of having Anna speak to us at the beginning is because I wanted all of us to have an inspiration when we say that sustainability is the future that Africa's tourism is looking for, we wanted this to be demonstrated. And the long run is just one of the opportunities that are available for businesses to do that. It is important to note that from what Anna has told us, that none of the long run members therefore ceased work during this crisis. And she has said that, yes, it did take some sacrifices, but it also took a lot of advanced preparation in many other areas that enabled them to do this. And when she did highlight the 4 areas when she was talking about what resilience depended on, I connected that with the fact that they were able to continue because they had a long-term vision. They had integrity and transparency in the work that they were doing. They had closed as many loops as possible, which means they had minimized the areas in which they could have leakages and losses. And this prepared them for a crisis. So we are learning this morning that sustainability can actually future-proof our businesses against risks. I have also had very clearly, as Dr. Anne outlined the process of the long run, it comes out very clearly that sustainability has a methodology. I have always said it in a different way in the past, that it is not guesswork, but from what we have heard, we can see that definitely it has a methodology. And that methodology is what helps destinations and businesses to build resilience in the long term. And last but not least, she has concluded by telling us that it makes business sense. And of course it does, because these companies continued with their work and did not cease during this time. Some of them, like she gave the example of Grotbus, that even transformed to become a support to their community during this particular crisis, when they could not do the usual things that they always do with the community because of the pandemic. So we're starting on an inspirational note that sustainability does work, and sustainability is at the core of resilience, and that there is a method for doing the same. We are going to take questions after Rose speaks, so continue to share your questions. Any questions you have for Dr. Anne-Kathrin. Dr. Anne-Kathrin, as we come back, I will ask you this question, so prepare for it. I will ask you to talk about green hashing, where businesses are not able to communicate effectively what they do for people and planets, whether this is a challenge for your members of the long run, green hashing. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to invite our next speaker, who is Rose Mukogo from Climate Friendly Travel, to share with us her presentation. Rose, take this opportunity to introduce yourself further to the audience here. And I'm so excited that we have a hosting of the Climate Friendly Registry in Africa, and that Rose is involved with this very noble initiative. So climate crisis is not far from us, just like I said at the beginning. Rose, the floor is yours. Most welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Judy, for the kind introduction. I am very excited to be part of this summit. A summit which comes when we have a pandemic. A summit which comes when we in Africa are really suffering and reeling from this pandemic, because we are a long-haul destination, but all is not lost. Listening and hearing from the long run from Dr. Anne, who we have been talking to as Climate Friendly Travel Registry, it's encouraging that we have an opportunity to relook, restart, regenerate our tourism in a different way. And as you were saying, Judy, when we during the meet and greet of the speakers, you talked about science-based, the need for us as an industry to start looking at issues by using data, by being scientific as we move forward, because this will help us in the sustainability, in the approach to sustainability as a tourism industry. I am Rose Mukogo, coming to you and talking to you from Harare, Zimbabwe. I'm an economist by training. In my career, I worked in the Ministry of Environment and Tourism for a number of years. I then worked for the Zimbabwe Tourism Authority as a director for research and product development, and eventually as an interim CEO. I then left the public sector and started working for a company which was building the current international airport in Harare. I was invited to come back to the private sector, but I then realized that there is more out there in the private sector and in the tourism industry where I could contribute. And eventually I became a board member for the Zimbabwe Parks and Wildlife Management Authority for 12 years. I was a board member for the Forestry Commission, where tourism also takes place, because most of the tourism in Zimbabwe is really nature-based. I am currently involved with the Climate Friendly Travel Registry, which is an online tool developed to record the various initiatives which travel and tourism are doing to mitigate against climate change. So this is a new development which was launched in September last year, developed under SUNx Malta. It's something which, as an industry, we really have to think about. Sometimes we take too long to mainstream or engage new instruments and realize so late that maybe we should have gone this route. I'm saying this because of, if you look at the pandemic today, if you watch cable news network, you find that we only can know the severity of the COVID-19 pandemic because we have a basis where figures are being aggregated by the World Health Organization. Imagine if we didn't have the World Health Organization putting all this information together. Each country would be doing its own thing. Even the way the vaccinations are happening, we would not know who is doing what and how we're going to move forward. But at the end of the day, we are one under the Mother Earth. We are one in terms of how we do our things. We suffer the same way if we don't work together. So the Climate Friendly Travel Registry is a tool which I believe is very important for us as we move forward. But before I preempt the next presentation, which is a video on the climate friendly travel, may I ask the operators to play the video so that we can have a visual impact of what we're talking about. Thank you. I don't seem to be having it. So we are not having volume.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Ollie Wheatcroft. I'm the program manager at SUNx Malta. I've been working alongside Jeffrey Lippman for the last 5 years to help to develop a climate-friendly travel framework, which was inspired by Maurice Strong, the first person to put climate change on the global agenda. This slide is all about how we are trying to help to support and engage companies and communities. And the green arrow on the diagram represents the 50-year transformation journey starting in 1972 with the UN Stockholm Conference on the Human Environment, which was the first Earth Summit. It then goes through the key milestone events in the evolution of sustainable development and climate change strategy, from the 1987 Brundtland Commission to the Rio Earth Summit and subsequent Agenda 21. Key milestone events then include the Millennium Development Goals, which subsequently was transitioned into being the Sustainable Development Goals as we now know them. And then, most importantly, in terms of the context of climate-friendly travel, the 2015 Paris Climate Agreement. Maurice Strong was the first person to put climate change on the global agenda and to recognise the existential nature of climate change. And the graph on the right is our critical focal point. The area in red near the bottom of the curve is where we are now. And our mission is to bend our trend to transition into the blue section onto a more sustainable pathway. Climate-friendly travel has three main components. It's low carbon, contributing to the sector transformation of travel and tourism. It's SDG linked, focusing on goal 13, as well as all relevant sustainable development goal interlinkages. And finally, focuses on the Paris Climate Agreement with what is now clearly a 1.5 degree target. Our climate-friendly travel framework has two main components, action and education. Within the work on action, we're spearheading through our climate-friendly travel registry for 2050 climate neutral and sustainability ambitions. This is a place where companies and communities can commit, plan and record their action programs and receive support to achieve their climate and sustainability goals. We've developed a series of support hubs focusing on innovation and best practice, strategy in the form of reports from the public and private sector, and learning through multimedia resources on climate-friendly travel. Finally, marketing through SDG 17 partner organisations, providing outreach and online visibility. Education starts in the schools with a lesson plan for teachers based around 65 cartoons featuring a friendly dodo that returns from extinction to support climate-friendly travel. Our climate-friendly travel diploma, which was launched in October of last year, 2020, and currently has 45 students from over 30 countries learning about the fundamentals of climate-friendly travel, taught by some of the leading experts across the world on climate change and tourism. Our annual Maurice Strong Youth Summit and Awards, which we are proud to launch this year and hope to grow year on year as a key annual event. And finally, our plan for our kids to train 100,000 strong climate champions across all UN states by 2030. Our outreach is led through our State of the Sector annual report with the World Travel and Tourism Council. It focuses on the development of climate-friendly travel to support the transformation of companies and communities to meet their Paris 1.5 degree commitment. We work through SDG 17 partnership agreements with like-minded organisations to strengthen our capacity. For example, with WTTC within the travel and tourism sector and the Earth Council covering the sustainable development sector. All of this reflects the vision of the inspiration for SUNx, Maurice Strong. We committed to making the next 10 years the decade of climate-friendly travel. Over this period, we've set the following targets: to support 100,000 climate champions across all UN states, 10,000 companies to be supported to develop robust climate plans on the registry, 500 communities who are committed to climate-friendly travel with registered climate action plans, 1,000 climate-friendly travel diploma graduates, and 5,000 trainers working through 200 nationally sponsored climate champions programs. This is what we've called a plan for our kids, a support system for travel and tourism to meet its commitment under the Paris Climate Agreement through climate-friendly travel. Thank you.
Thank you so much for playing that video. If I can just then be allowed to continue sharing more about the registry. Can I have slide 10? Thank you so much. The registry, sometimes from the discussions which we've had with a number of potential registrants, initially it looks like a very difficult exercise in that it asks about a lot of questions of maybe things which have not done before as operators. But the honest truth is, this is where we need to go if we have to bend the trend. So the CFT registry, we do have a website, www.climatefriendly.travel, for those of us who would want to get more information about it. But it does support a post-pandemic restart with a green and clean focus, which, as we go into and move into the future, a lot, as Dr. Anne has said, a lot of our customers will begin to ask for climate-friendly destinations. Governments will begin to ask for operators to share methodically, technically, and quantitatively the various activities they are doing to reduce mitigation of greenhouse gases, because governments currently have already gone out and shared their nationally determined contributions. If I can speak for Zimbabwe, in the last few weeks, the Minister of Environment, Climate Change, Tourism and Hospitality Industry was going around creating awareness to the students, to operators, what it means for them to be aware of the nationally determined contributions for Zimbabwe as we prepare for COP26, which is coming in Scotland in November 2021. Registration of our emissions or the various mitigation measures helps to build a stronger travel and tourism, carbon reduction and sustainability plans, and to link them to the Paris, as you have heard, Paris 1.5 framework. Registration is also a marketing tool, and this is a program which is generally free except for 50 euros, which is a reasonable amount just for us to maintain the annual registration. If we can move on to the next slide. Who can participate in the climate-friendly registry? This is any travel and tourism company or community. Whether the sustainability or carbon reduction plans are there or not, it is important to start the process. So what we have done is that you can start by the registration, and then we can work with you for the following 2 years to develop and file the plans. There will be an opportunity to have to then go into the registry for the information which Oli talked about, the 4 different hubs which can assist any operator how to go about registering the various activities which they are doing in terms of the mitigation of greenhouse gases. We will ensure that the linkage to the UNFCCC programs in the UN Global Climate Action Platform is part of the whole process. If I can mention that we've recently received support from Patricia Espinosa. She is the boss of the UNFCCC. So already, as an online tool, which is linked to the United Nations framework for climate change, we are already a step ahead because we are the only tool. Currently, we are the only tool linked to what the UN is already doing in making sure that we record what we are doing as a sector, as different nationalities at global level to show what we are supposed to be doing as far as our climate change is concerned. Thank you. Can we move on to the next one? Everyone needs to complete part A of the online registry, which is just a commitment by the chair or the CEO of the organization. And then part B of the entry is for those ready to file their plans. This requires a fact-based measurement system and must incorporate SDGs targets and progressive carbon reduction following the nationally determined contributions. It's a simple process. You first sign up and you work with us to sharpen the plans and record them on our site. We will then incorporate them into the UN climate programs and help to showcase them. Next slide, please. If I can share, what are the benefits? The CFT registry brings members into a system that helps to define and improve sustainability and climate action plans by encouraging filing and annual review. It will put the declaration of an organization into defined action that can be incorporated in the UN Climate Action Portal and the rest to zero. It also provides good practice examples, strategy guidance, learning programs, and public showcasing through the growing list of the SUNx Malta SDG17 partners, which Oli spoke about. If I can move to the next slide. The CFT registry is dedicated support staff to help members at all stages of their climate-friendly travel development. We have Dr. Hans Friedrich. He is based in Gozo in Malta and is a former executive in the IUCN and ex-director general of INBA, an intergovernmental agency for bamboo and rattan based in China. Hans is a passionate individual. He's so passionate about nature-based solutions that he is, sometimes we actually say he's on steroids as far as nature is concerned. And he is a great help and very much engaged with the climate-friendly travel registry as the registrar. And of course, you have yours truly. I'm based in Harare, and I've been involved for a long time in the tourism industry, in my public service career, in my consulting career, and currently in the climate change environment. And I must say that I am so excited about STAS2021 because it has given me an opportunity to bring my tourism experience to meet with the environment experience, which Judy says this is the nexus between tourism and environment, or travel and environment. We always look at these two activities as separate activities, but at the end of the day, climate change brings them together. And if we can manage climate change, we are going to manage travel and tourism, and we are going to manage our environment successfully. Our website, as I've said, is also www.climatefriendly.travel. And we have a chat, a live chat, where if you have any problems or issues, we are very happy to help you along the way. Last but not least, maybe just to have an idea of who is involved in this program. There's Jeffrey Lipman, who is the president of SUNx Malta. There's the chairman, Leslie Vela. There's Felix Dold, the associate fellow. We have Hans Friedrich, whom I've talked about, Oli, Anna, and myself. Thank you so much for this opportunity to present to fellow colleagues in the tourism and travel industry. I am so happy that we are talking about such issues because Bill Gates himself mentioned that the C-19 pandemic is easier, much easier to resolve than climate change. And Jeffrey Lippman always says, if we are not careful, if we do not treat climate change as existential and there's an issue which needs urgent attention, climate change will be like COVID-19 on steroids if we don't do anything about it. So my fellow colleagues, we have a challenge to critically consider documenting whatever efforts we are doing, because at the end of the day, we may find that it's the travel and tourism industry which will lead other industries to realize that if we do not measure, we don't know what we are looking at, and it'll be very difficult to manage. So it's important for us to measure what we are doing to reduce the greenhouse gases, to manage climate change by registering whatever we're doing for the tourism industry on the climate-friendly travel registry. Thank you so much, Judy. Thank you so much for the STAS2021 session. And I believe we are making progress, even if we're under a pandemic, even if this is a hybrid event. I am so excited. I just feel I'm sitting in Nairobi because I'm meeting everybody from all over the world. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Rose, for sharing with us. These two presentations that we have had this morning, they were meant to prepare us. They were meant to answer the pertinent issues around the 2 days. They were also meant to tell us that there are solutions and there is hope. We have listened to Dr. Anne, and she has answered our question whether sustainability is the future we're looking for. We have listened now to Rose and the initiative. There are many initiatives and many approaches to dealing with carbon in the tourism industry. But the climate registry, like we have been told, has been recognized by the United Nations framework for climate change. So when we register our initiatives within this framework, they become recognized and they are used to measure the overall contribution of tourism in addressing issues of climate change. And so again, listening to her, we can be confident that if climate is a significant crisis, there are tools and methods for the tourism industry to deal with it. But just that we don't lose the whole gist of this discussion is the significance that this is the decade for action on climate change. Thank you, Rose, for that discussion. You can share the links on the chat again, and you can also, participants can share their questions that you may have for Rose as we go forward. Now, allow me, because of significant time differences for one of our speakers this morning, it's quite late in the night for Dr. Julia. And so I am requesting Velma, first of all, to allow Dr. Julia to go next, and then Velma will come after Dr. Julia, although it would have been, thank you so much, Velma, because it's very late for Dr. Julia. And also I'm requesting the participants to allow me to take the questions, all questions together after we have heard all the 4 speakers. So Dr. Julia, you're next. And thank you for being here late night for you to share with us your experiences. Most welcome.
Thank you very much, Judy, for your introduction and for your kind words. And thank you very much, Velma, for letting me skip the queue with my presentation tonight. I really appreciate it. It's getting towards 9 o'clock in New Zealand, and it's always better to present early and still be fresh. So before starting, I would also like to acknowledge the organizers of STAS and also the Sustainable Travel and Tourism Agenda Organization for their support of this event, and also for the kind invitation to present our work. Many of you I haven't met before, so it's a pleasure to meet you. My name is Julia Albrecht. I'm with the Department of Tourism at the University of Otago in New Zealand, and my research interests are in destination management for sustainability, but also a lot of my work is looking at visitor management and visitor experiences and nature-based tourism as well. I will now start to share my screen so that you will only have a small picture of me sitting in the corner. So our topic for the next 20 minutes is visitor pledges, and I'm going to explain how these work as a social marketing tool and how we can use them to encourage positive visitor behavior. So I'm going to first explain what they are, share some thoughts on their relative merits and drawbacks, and also in the end outline some main steps and considerations in pledge development as well. Within all this, by no means do I mean to suggest that every destination should now go and start their own pledge and develop and implement such initiatives. But I do want to present them as a potentially useful tool, as an innovative approach to managing visitor behavior. And they are worth looking at, I will suggest, as just one component of a comprehensive framework to manage visitor behavior and manage visitor impacts for sustainable tourism in a destination. As I start, I would also like to acknowledge my friend and co-researcher Eliza, who has worked with me on this presentation. Eliza is a researcher, but she is also a social entrepreneur in tourism, and she is a co-founder of Good Travel, which I hope some of you may have heard about before. Now, to our topic. So visitor pledges, as I've said, are essentially tools. They are just one tool in a wider tool set to promote behavior change for sustainable tourism. And in this presentation, I'm going to offer an applied perspective on these pledges, outlining what we can do with those in practice in a destination. And in this presentation, I'm going to draw on a study that Eliza and I have done. That study looked at 5 high-level location-based destination pledges. So the arrows on the slide indicate where those are located. So we are looking at national level destination pledges for Iceland, Finland, New Zealand, and Palau, but we also included a pledge for the island of Hawaii in Hawaii. Many of you will have come across the idea of a pledge before. There is an increasing number of issues-based pledges, for example, looking at things like waste or avoiding littering. Then there are several pledges that look at small-scale destinations, but these are not the focus today. So we're looking at sort of high-level destination pledges for behavior change. The whole idea of these types of pledges is actually a relatively new phenomenon. So the first one was developed in Iceland, the so-called Icelandic pledge, and that was launched in June 2017. And in it, you will find some of those statements on the screen, things like, I pledge to be a responsible tourist. I will only park where I am supposed to do. So essentially, by taking this pledge, visitors commit to engaging in these types of behaviors. Visitors or prospective visitors can take this pledge online before even visiting Iceland, but they can also symbolically press a button upon arrival at the international airport Keflavik. And interestingly, so far in all of these destinations, this is very much a pledge that indicates goodwill on the side of the visitor. There is no policing and no checking if visitors do indeed behave as they have pledged. Now, after Iceland, several other destinations followed suit. For example, in Finland, as you can see on these examples here, visitors pledged to behave like a Finn. So essentially they pledged that they will behave like one of the locals. This pledge is slightly different in that some of the text rhymes, and they have attempted to introduce some humor in the wording, but they have found that that didn't sit particularly well with all their visitor markets. So each of these pledges is quite different, really. Here's a summary of the New Zealand one. So that one addresses behavior like driving carefully on the left side, which for some of the key markets is a new concept. It also emphasizes that in nature-based tourism, when visitors go hiking, for example, they need to look after themselves. So it's very much something that is sold on the idea of benefiting the destination, but also benefiting the visitors themselves as well. So that's an important component that many of these pledges share. With New Zealand's Tiaki promise, visitors are asked to pledge via social media. So out of all the pledges I'm showing you today, this is the one that most perceptibly relies on the use of social media. So if you have time and inclination, you can check my Twitter now. It's JNA1977, and you will see that earlier today I took the Tiaki promise, and you can see what it looks like in a social media account when it's presented and shared with others if you wish. This is what the Palau Pledge looks like, and that is a very different concept compared to some of the other ones that I've just shown you. When visitors arrive in the country, they receive a stamp in their passport, and you can see that stamp here on the screen. And you are then asked to sign this stamp in the presence of immigration officials. Now, this takes the idea of a commitment to a different level, doesn't it? So it's a step that may actually allow for policing of pledge transgressions at some point down the track. I also note here that some pledges target local populations. So especially with the one in Hawaii, we have found that a lot of locals bought into the idea of positive behavior in their home as well. So the pledge went way past visitors only. Now, the study that we have done covered the 5 pledges that I have just mentioned. And we conducted a qualitative study using a pragmatic paradigm. We did 19 interviews with 22 participants representing all the 5 pledges. And at the time of conducting the research, those were all high-level destination pledges that were around. In the meantime, there have been an additional two pledges that have been released, but clearly once COVID hit, all of these ideas have been parked to an extent. So how does this tool fit in to a wider tool set of managing visitor behavior? So, for example, before visitor pledges, there were codes of conduct, right? Most of us remember how they worked. So the one on the right here is a typical example. We see bullet points of do's and don'ts that outline the types of behaviors that are either desired or to be avoided. For example, it states, do be friendly and polite, but don't break any laws in this example here. The pledges are quite different. The 2 main differences are that codes of conduct do not always provide a rationale for compliance. As you will see, some of the pledges try to explain why a certain behavior is appreciated or desired. And excuse me. And in doing so, they have the potential to have a much more positive messaging. So it's less confrontational or aggressive language. So remember, with codes of conduct, we have very direct language, do this, do that. With the pledges, we saw that this can be a lot more playful. And the idea is also that with this playfulness, visitors are encouraged to build a connection to the place, to the destination, to have perhaps a lighter relationship as opposed to being told what to do and how to behave in the pledge. Now, in New Zealand, our research respondents also stated that they believed engaging visitors in an understanding of why the New Zealand pledge, which is called the Tiaki Promise, is important, would result in a greater sense of respect, and that this sense of respect would then hopefully translate into positive visitor behavior. So in explaining the rationale, in explaining it in a positive way, the pledges attempt to forge this emotional connection to a destination. So another additional interesting characteristic of the pledges is that they build on the so-called commitment consistency principle. I'll just give you a few seconds to go through the quotes that I show you on the screen before I continue talking. So as you will have seen, the idea is that if you formally commit to a goal, you are much more likely to achieve that goal. And this has actually been shown to be successful. So for example, with individuals who pursue fitness goals, or with individuals who try to quit smoking or alcohol. So this works. If I publicly commit to doing something, as I would do with a pledge, I've got a much higher likelihood of being successful. And this is why some of the pledges place so much emphasis on the social media component, or in the case of Palau, even on signing one's passport, probably the most official document that any of us will possess. The reason I include this information about New Zealand is to illustrate how much collaboration can go into these types of initiatives. So as you can see here, there's been input from a wide variety of types of organizations. So there was the National Airline, there's the International Marketing Agency, the Department of Conservation, Tourism. There's the main industry lobbying group, Tourism Industry Aotearoa. THL is one of the main business conglomerates, and there was input from local government as well. So these are obviously some of the very powerful stakeholders in tourism, and they did come together to agree on the content of this pledge. So this isn't something that a small working group has dreamt up in a back office somewhere. This is something that required a lot of stakeholder input. However, it doesn't need to be like this. One of the other groups of marketers and destination managers we talked to was the group of people who developed the Icelandic pledge. And that was very different. That was one organization with a very small number of people who essentially dreamt up this whole idea, developed it, and implemented it. So obviously what I'm trying to say here is we can do this at different scales. It doesn't necessarily mean that one approach is more successful than the other. There are options, and both of those can result in very positive outcomes. Some of the destinations we spoke to placed a great emphasis on culture and language, and that's not surprising at all. Destination managers and also marketers saw this as the right thing to do. But also, as I've said earlier, they saw this as a good way to engage visitors emotionally, which, as you remember, was one of the underlying ideas of how to get these pledges to be as successful as possible. So, for example, in Palau, children were involved in the development of the pledge itself, and the document and the initiative is even described as a pledge for and by Palau's children. And this is illustrated in, for example, the in-flight video to Palau being narrated by a child, but other destinations have found other ways in which to reflect their own culture and language. But all of these destinations that did this were very clear that they did it on purpose and that it was a very, very important thing for them to do and to implement. Another thing we found that the pledges were intended as a tool for business operators to communicate desirable behavior to their customer and clients. So business operators found that it helped them to broach unpleasant topics in a more neutral, less confrontational way. So, for example, they didn't have to remind visitors all the time, please don't do this instead, please behave like that. There could be a easier conversation like, oh, remember when we looked at this document earlier, it would be better if we did this, that, or the other. So the pledges offered an opportunity to reframe a conversation with visitors that otherwise could have been somewhat less pleasant for the tour guide or the business, as well as for the visitors. So that's something that was especially emphasized in 2 out of those 5 destinations that we spoke with. It is quite noteworthy, actually, that several of the organizations involved with pledge development are typically responsible for destination marketing. So one example is Promote Iceland and Tourism New Zealand as well, but it came up in Palau quite strongly as well. And there was quite a disagreement as to the extent to which these pledges could function as traditional marketing as well. And I guess the polar opposites here were Palau and New Zealand, where in Palau they said, look, if we can use this pledge to attract like-minded visitors that agree with our vision, then of course we are going to use it as a marketing tool as well. Whereas in New Zealand, they were very clear that Tiaki would align with the 100% pure campaign, but it would never be in competition with it, it would never replace it, and so on. So Tiaki, the pledge, was described as very much of a standalone initiative, which has a lot to do with how the pledge is being seen differently in the 2 destinations, but also with, there are structural reasons in New Zealand as well for this type of response to it. Now, I said earlier, I would suggest or offer a sort of step-by-step pledge development guideline or suggestion. So we have put this together based on respondents' experiences with pledge development and pledge implementation. And this overview outlines some of the most important aspects that our respondents have found therein. So noteworthy here is the advice to create a working group to manage a process, but also consultation as early as possible. They emphasize to us the importance of a communication strategy, on the one hand, to guide the consultation, but also to envisage as early as possible how later on key markets would be addressed and involved as well. And pretty much every destination talked about using multiple channels to ensure that the pledges are seen repeatedly, that they are seen in the relevant location, and so on. The focus on key markets and utilizing various languages illustrate that I do think there is some overlap with traditional marketing, but also generic management techniques and processes, and that's perfectly understandable because at the end of the day, the people involved with developing and implementing it are managers and destination marketers. So I'm guessing that once travel and pledging resumes, we will have opportunity to look into this later stage evaluation and monitoring more closely. We didn't yet have an opportunity to complete that part of the research. And we are also planning to conduct research to obtain a visitor perspective on the pledges as well. Lastly, I have summarized why and how we believe the pledges can be useful. So they can be adapted quite widely to suit different visitor impacts. So there's no reason whatsoever to focus on, let's say, negative impact on the natural environment only, when there can also be an emphasis on, for example, the social environment as well, or even with regard to the economic environment, and emphasize things like buying local, for example. In destinations that have for a very long time marketed and engaged with stakeholders in the same way, the pledges can also offer a fresh start without completely overhauling existing marketing campaigns. So they could, for example, be used to try a slightly different image of the destination without changing completely the marketing message that there would usually be. So as such, they offer an opportunity to also reframe messaging, to move away from this, do this, don't do that type of language, to be more positive, to offer a rationale for desired behavior when we talk about visitor management, for example. So we can move on from previous narratives that mostly zero in on what visitors must not do. They can be used by businesses and thereby by tour guides, for example, as a communication strategy with customers and clients. This can be not only useful in these type of behave in a certain way situations, that can be adapted for example, risk management as well, as we have seen with the New Zealand pledge, which focused on driving and safety in the outdoors as well. So they are really very adaptable and very flexible concepts that can be made to work for the destination. So this for now concludes our excursion into the visitor pledges. Now, again, I'm not suggesting that we should all go home into our respective destinations now and whip up one of those, but I do think that in certain circumstances, these pledges can be a useful tool as part of an overall destination management and visitor impact management strategy. At the moment, in some of what we do, communication with the visitor is very one-sided, and the pledges offer an opportunity to engage the visitors more deeply and potentially better, not only during a trip, but also before. And if we do manage to have better connections between the traveler and the destination, and to have a bit more of an emotional connection, I do think there is a lot of opportunity to have more meaningful and responsible relationships with our guests, which of course can only be a good thing. And that concludes the sad little excursion into the visitor pledges. And I'll stop sharing the slides now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Julia, for sharing with us insights of how visitor pledges work. A few of us, or maybe many of us, have come across them, but we have not come across insights on studies of how they work. There has been confusion that visitor pledges is the same thing as codes of conduct. But today you have made clear the difference between visitor pledges and codes of conduct. There are higher levels of commitment, but you have also made it very clear that the language is different in codes of conduct as from the ones that we have in visitor pledges. once again, we are learning about tools and methods. We know the significance of visitor engagement and building relationships with visitors in building resilience, even for our businesses and at national level or at destination level. So it is one of the tools, and Dr. Julia continuously had disclaimers of what she was presenting to us. It's a knowledge, it's an awareness. Like we say at every STAS conference, we come to learn and relearn new things. So we have learned something. We can take it away with us and see how and whether it can work for us. I have seen a suggestion that it could work for our national parks. But what we know is that it allows for a meaningful and deeper engagement with travelers before and during travel. And therefore, it is a tool that we can consider amongst the mix of other tools that we use for building visitor relationships. Dr. Julia, just a quick one. Are you going to stay with us for another half an hour so that we can take all the questions?
I will be very happy to do so. Thank you.
Oh, okay, because we have some questions coming up, but we will take them all together so that I can allow Velma to make her presentation and we can have some discussions all together. Now allow me to welcome Velma. I had introduced her. She's from Saffir Africa. She's head of operations and design, and she's going to talk to us about shaping and positioning brand Africa. Welcome, Velma.
Myself, I suppose you can hear me now.
Yes, I can.
Good morning. Good morning from Nairobi. Good night from elsewhere in the world. Thank you very much. I am happy to be here and to have this opportunity to present our views on what Brand Africa can be or can be shaped by, because this is something relatively new. It's not something it's something that Africa is still grappling with. We're 54 countries. We can't really be a single brand, but we can think somehow towards that and we can learn from each other. So I'm just going to introduce Saffir Africa briefly. Saffir Africa is a destination marketing company that explores the latent potential of destinations and properties while creating multiple experiences for guests. We look at data, we look at technology, we like to be informed by different things in terms of how we go forward for different clients. So technology features heavily and our focus is in the tourism and travel sector. So Saffir, we came together as a company brought together by one thing. We viewed the entire south of the Sahara. I know people like to say sub-Sahara. We like to say Africa south of the Sahara, that is ASOS, because we're not under the desert, we are just below the other countries that are north of the Sahara. So we view the entire ASOS area, Africa south of the Sahara, as domestic market. We don't view each country on its own as a domestic market. So the idea of a more open Africa, a travelable Africa, a less circuitous and less expensive Africa is desirable to us. So we were driven by that idea that Africa can become interconnected somehow, first for Africans and then for the rest of the world, because if we enjoy it, then the rest of the world can come in and also enjoy what we enjoy. So I'm going to look at 4 broad questions that were asked of me. Why is shaping Africa and positioning Africa as a connected brand necessary? How will African nations share the markets? How will the competition be managed? And is there political goodwill from the larger Africa? So for me, we look at 3 areas: economy, employment, and demographic dividend. These are things that Africa has plenty of and has plenty of opportunity and hasn't quite tapped into in a big way. So as far as diversification of the economy, trade between African countries has a lot of potential, but sustainable economic development and integration is still something that we're still building towards. Many African countries still struggle with low economic growth rates because of low manufacturing. We're not processing our raw materials in our countries. We're exporting the raw materials, so we can't generate the kind of jobs that would actually be sustainable for our population. So that's where tourism comes in. Intra-Africa tourism has an even bigger impetus for social economic development. But because of that fragmented nature of Africa, low connectedness between the countries, then it still has a lot of to be tapped into. So beyond a connected brand Africa for global consumption, Africa needs to be consumed as a destination by Africans themselves. So for us, that's very important. First, within the country, the people, say in Kenya or in Gambia, the people there need to feel that they can consume the tourism brand of that country as easily as anyone else. But instead, in a lot of cases, we find that it's easier for tourists coming in to consume our country themselves. So that needs to change. So for us to next slide. So for diversification to happen, then we have to think about how it works for ourselves first. Next slide. In a diverse economy, what happens is the local people's livelihoods take center stage, and their stewardship is sought very actively. That means first they enjoy living and the quality of life in a destination, those beloved destinations that you enjoy, they must enjoy life there first. For that place to be peaceful and enjoyable for visitors coming in. So it can be, in our case, I'm going to focus on Kenya. Marsabit needs to first be enjoyed by the residents, the people who call Marsabit home, for it to be enjoyable by somebody from Meru region, from Nairobi, going to Marsabit. So there should be water, there should be access to good schools, there should be access to, many people in Marsabit are mostly livestock keepers, so you're either herding camels, goats, or fisheries if you're by the Lake Turkana. So if there are no systems supporting those livelihoods there, cattle dips, slaughterhouses, cooling facilities for products from that livestock, then those places cannot be peaceful enough for people who are visitors to come enjoy the desert, the dunes there, the lakeside, and other facilities, other interesting things that are in Marsabit. So next slide. So in a diverse, resilient economy, conservation strategies must support and must center people's livelihoods. And at this point, I'd like to mention two great examples that have come out of Kenya that show how these things can be. So there's a book by Mordecai Ogada and John Barrier called The Big Conservation Lie. This book presents a very important challenge to those in conservation. It shows the errors that have been made in the past in the name of conservation, and the way, and this book actually and its contents can serve as a great caution for the rest of Africa, especially the younger countries like South Africa, that's new as a new democracy, still grappling with the land issue and land ownership, and also a great and a very desirable tourist destination with a very, very strong brand in tourism. So these are things, this book can actually serve as a huge caution on the direction to take in the future going forward, so that we don't end up scaling problems that are in our countries into the entire Africa. So we must scale up good practices across Africa. The second example I'd like to share, and I'll share it also in the chat, Nashulai Maasai Conservancy. This is the only community-owned conservancy in the Mara, and it serves as a beacon for what conservation with a people's stewardship could be. Communities in rural areas, they generally bear the brunt of conservation agendas by giving up land for wildlife and for other facilities that the government considers important or a priority, but they don't get commensurate gains. So Nashulai Maasai Conservancy is a great example of how that confluence, the meeting between business, government, and conservation can be better managed to make sure that the people within who live in that place gain. I'll share that in the chat so that then you can follow up at your own time. I'm just going to, so that I don't forget, I'm just going to share that now. And you'll find that as I speak about what I'm speaking about, my emphasis is on not scaling up only the good things out of our countries, and that means shared knowledge. We have to find ways to share the knowledge that is the good that has come out of our countries, and then scale it up across Africa. Share with especially the countries that are coming out of conflicts like Somalia and Sudan, both of which, by the way, in my view, have great nature-based product that can be consumed once they get their national issues together in the future. So those countries can then join the rest of Africa in a way that will be positive. They will have learned the things that the mistakes that we have made, and they don't replicate them in their own countries. So we should be able to share knowledge. Next slide. In countries where tourism sector is dominant, mostly, we find vulnerable employment rate is lower. So we can see here tourism has a huge role to play in absorbing and shifting unemployment in a big way if it's harnessed properly. Tourism, for instance, in Kenya, it provides employment for about 8 to 10% of the population. In Gambia, it provides about a fifth of Gambians with employment. And so while it's absorbing people into employment, it's also providing foreign exchange. So it's very important to think about how that kind of thinking can then be scaled across Africa. The Africa that's not manufacturing enough, that's not producing enough, how do we harness tourism to absorb and shift unemployment? So and then again, in both countries, Gambia and Kenya, and pretty much most West African countries, you find the rural areas are the areas that are very are touristic, sort of, except with Kenya, we also have the national park here in Nairobi. But rural areas are largely the ones that are areas where those jobs in tourism can make a big difference, because then it's either agriculture or tourism. So it's one of the two. Tourism provides, in those rural areas, it provides opportunities for lower skilled individuals. You can easily be a guide showcasing the river area in your village and earn something from that as you farm, as you do other activities. So it has it creates that there's a huge craving and a rise in authentic experience products and those rural areas, and that kind of knowledge, local knowledge, can be tapped in a way that then it creates employment. Next slide. The other area that I believe, the third area is for Africa is we can use tourism to reap the demographic dividend. A large number of jobs in tourism are very well suited for young people and also suited for different level of education attainment. So you have the rural guide with local knowledge who knows his way up the mountain because he's done it a million times since he was a child, a little boy. And then you have the people who are really well trained. They know how to handle certain equipment for rescue and for safety and that kind of thing. So these people come together and provide and create great products that are very authentic, and because they're youthful, they can do it for a very long time. So as the demographic dividend for Africa begins to grow, tourism sector can be identified as a significant potential to harness labor and absorb labor for young people especially. So again, when we talk about demographic dividend, we cannot ignore training. We have across Africa, I don't know about maybe South Africa has a stronger school or training to industry pipeline for tourism. Kenya also somewhat does, but there are problems still, even in Kenya. We've had these discussions on various forums. We have a forum on Telegram for hospitality players. So we have cooks in there, we have chefs, and they all talk about similar things. There's no access to internship. There's no access to, how do I know where there's an internship, you know? There's a lack, there's a gap, a knowledge gap, an awareness gap there that's causing a lot of young people to fall through the gap. Yeah, so they're not getting connected to industry quickly enough. So training, school to industry pipeline is not well structured to help young people in tourism get placement to bridge easily into employment. So those are things that are very important. The other thing is lack of meaningful jobs. You find a lot of, it's not meaningful in that the wage is not a living wage. You don't feel that you can actually support your family or raise a family with those wages. So those two things, lack of meaningful jobs and the wage conditions, and access to quality education and training, that pipeline into employment is missing. On those two first points, the lack of meaningful jobs and access to quality education and training with a school to industry pipeline structure, I would like to challenge institutions like the Kenya Research Institute to not only look at the number of tourists coming in, head counts and that kind of thing, also do research and look more deeply into issues that are contributing to shifting unemployment in Kenya, especially making sure that the data that they glean out of this then can be made available to other governments, so that then when we're talking about harnessing brand Africa and creating products across borders, we don't replicate those problems across the border. So it's so important that we look at these two areas very, very critically and not ignore them. So if each country, if there's a research institute for tourism in each country, can they look into that and then come together and share that knowledge so that then we can inform our governments and industry players on what the issues are and then begin to solve them. Next slide. So the other question is, who will market it? Next slide. That is the demographic. Who will market this? Next slide again. Yes. So there are two people. So you have the tourism bodies. Each country has a tourism board or some form of tourism body that is promoting its country. And then you have the African Tourism Board that was launched in November 2018 at the WTM in London. It was a soft launch. So slowly you're starting to see this kind of in-country structure coming into taking a position as an African institution. But then you can't completely ignore the small players. And for me, in promoting and moving Brand Africa, I believe tour operators are the most important unit in that structure. Tour operators are agile. Tour operators are able to formalize, have loose connections already across the borders. So you have Kenyan tour operators already working with Nigerian tour operators. It's loose. So they know each other, they know of each other, they hand guests over to each other. But those relationships need to be formalized. And this is where now the tour operator bodies need to step in. Come to the table with policy players. Tell them what the challenges you've experienced moving your guests from Kenya to Nigeria or from Nigeria to South Africa to tour. What have been those challenges? Then let them at that policy level then decide, okay, to ease this challenge that tour operators are experiencing so that people can move more easily and they can move their guests more easily. This is what we need to remove. This is what we need to add, make it easier for Africans to move within Africa. I mean, we already have a challenge with air travel. Africans move mainly by land, but are we counting how many Africans are just going for leisure? How much data do we have out of what the domestic market Africa has so far, so that we can say, okay, this is what we need to do to move it there. And tour operators already have that data. They already know. Tour operators in Nigeria know, tour operators in Ghana know, tour operators in South Africa know, and the Kenyan ones know as well. So bring them together. The tour operator bodies need to formalize their relationships and partnerships so that then that cross-border knowledge can then inform how we do business. Tour operators also have a great knowledge of the lay of the land of each country and then can share that knowledge with their neighbors. So then you expand the market. So what does it look like? Next slide. So for me, fine. African Tourism Board is doing their work, creating that web portal that will be interactive in the future, hopefully. I've looked at it and I've seen a potential for ways for it to become more buyer-seller focused. So to remove, already individual tourism boards are doing their work, making their countries visible. I mean, I saw an ad, I think it was targeted at my age group or my profile, and I saw a tweet from South African Tourism Board in Swahili, telling me Saffir South Africa. So things like that. So we don't need to do that again as an African Tourism Board. The African Tourism Board needs to change into a buyer-seller focused sort of market, now that they're online and they can see the whole scope of Africa. So other ways that I feel that Brand Africa can be harnessed is liberalization of our visa policies across the continent. We need to view each other's citizens with less suspicion. We need to remember that we are here. When borders were closed, the rest of the world wasn't coming here, we were still here. So we need to start viewing each other as potential business markets for travel. The African Union passport, right now, the African Union passport hasn't quite been liberalized. It's still kind of like a privileged sort of document. It needs to be liberalized in country, in every single country. You should get the option to get a Kenyan passport, an East African passport, or an AU passport. And your AU passport should give you the same privileges across Africa as any other citizen. So it should be more accessible, maybe even at the same price of your country passport. So that's something that EU needs to look at together with African governments. So we need to also look at enhanced communication, telecommunication connectivity. Data transmission needs to be faster to ease communication, to make communication faster, and then, but that might have to be more policymaker and business telco kind of roundtable discussion. What barriers need to be removed so that then MTN can easily migrate to Vodafone, can easily migrate to become Safaricom in Kenya, and so communication is easy. Cost, the issue of cost is actually a major issue. How much it costs per minute to communicate with your neighbor across the border. That needs to be one of the first things that is looked at. Aviation, I've mentioned the fragmented nature of transport in Africa. Again, I think this is the third time I've said it in this presentation. It's still viewed as a privilege or non-essential for Africans to travel within Africa. And when that happens, that challenge also happens for any visitor, an inbound traveler from Germany wanting to move to another country and travel and see the rest of the country and spend in those other countries will have the same challenge. They have to go back to Germany, then they can drop into Ghana, it will be easier for them to do that than to move from, say, Ethiopia to come to Kenya to go to South Africa. So when we don't look at how Africans travel themselves in Africa, we also make it a challenge for other visitors. We don't realize that, but that's what happens. So ease of air travel needs to just happen. I don't know how it's going to happen, but it is. There's small steps being made at the EU level, but they need to be absorbed into the regions, into the COMESA, into the EAC. They need to just be absorbed into the SADC region. That hasn't quite happened. Another very important, and it's happening slowly. You can see the northern corridor into Moyale, Ethiopia. Southern Ethiopia has made cross-border trade easier after the Moyale, Kenya, Nairobi Moyale road was completed beyond Marsabit. I remember going to Marsabit for the first time in 2018, and there's one phrase that kept being repeated: Marsabit is now in Kenya. Before then, Marsabit was considered some distant place outside Kenya because the road was not, the corridor was not complete into the north. Now it is. But we still see challenges in that, yes, there's a road from Kenya to Sudan, but then you have insecurity along that corridor. So there's something I recently learned about. There's a new bridge called Kazungula bridge between over the Limpopo between South Africa and Zambia. That's opening in May 2021, I think around May 10th. And for a long time, that border has always been in dispute. Where does it fall? But something has happened now that the Bait Bridge is no longer going to be like the only crossing point for freight trackers. It's going to open up that corridor much better. It's going to ease congestion at Bait Bridge. Then now you have the option to use Bait Bridge or to use the Kazungula Bridge. So these are things that need to happen faster. But even then, if you read the story of how the Kazungula Bridge came to be, there was a lot of politics. One country wanted to maintain the ferry crossing and collect fees, and didn't want to lose that, so they didn't want the bridge. So why this nationalistic sort of views are kind of blocking us from seeing what an open and interconnected Africa could be for us first as Africans, and then for the rest of the world. So another thing that's quickly emerging, I don't know about in other countries, but I know in Kenya it is marketing content, travel marketing content in African languages. We have a few channels, YouTube channels in vernacular coming up. There's a channel called Agendi channel. And they talk about the different destinations in Kenya, in Kikuyu, in Kiembu. I'd like to, and if such things can come up where you now see marketing content in Swahili, which is fast becoming popular across Africa. It's one of the most widely spoken. I'd like to see content in Hausa about Kenya. So Nigerians get to know about traveling around Kenya. So if a collaboration between the Agendi channel and a Hausa influencer could happen, for instance, that would be great. Then you can have, each of them can have subtitles in each other's languages. So we can have subtitles in Kiswahili about Nigeria. We can have subtitles in English of a Hausa video explaining Kenya to Nigerians. That kind of thing needs to start happening as well. So African languages in the marketing content. So other ways, in as far as business goes, e-commerce, financing across border needs to happen a little faster. Transaction costs are still too high. When you're transacting with somebody across the country, you need to change your currency into dollars first before then transacting. The faster that a more unified monetary sort of finance scenario can happen for Africa, at least first for East Africa, for SADC region, and then maybe for the West African region can happen, the easier business will be across border, and Brand Africa can be stronger that way. But again, we cannot stop talking about COVID-19. Last year was a really difficult year for travel and for tourism. So in-country public health care cannot be underemphasized. Disease control. There cannot be a separation between private healthcare and public healthcare. We were all here now. We were all suffering for a long time. We have to lay emphasis on disease control and public healthcare, so that when visitors visit each other's countries, then they know that the healthcare there can take care of them. So there'll be no fear. So another thing about the spread of COVID within Africa, in some ways, the low intra-Africa spread of COVID-19 has been a testimony to how poorly connected we are. But it has also been a testimony, in as much as it is a testimony to our experience on infectious disease handling and control. So we need to look at, those are two sides of the same coin. We haven't been able to spread COVID as easily because we're not very well connected, but we also have been good at handling ourselves and controlling infectious diseases. So in a way, we should be proud of ourselves, and in other ways, we shouldn't. So again, with tour operator associations, there's something I forgot to mention. E-commerce is fast becoming the way to do business across borders, Africa is vast. It will be the way to do business in the future. But still, within Africa and trust in e-commerce, the aspect of trust is still very low. So the tour operator will still be a very significant player, even with technology and e-commerce coming into play. The other thing is tour operators, because they have all this on the ground knowledge, they'll need to partner with booking engines to provide that on the ground sort of connection between booking engines and then the ground handling. So you may have your small market within Africa, and you've got your catchment of 120 people who always come back to you for their travel. But now to be able to capture the market of millions, you need to partner with somebody who has a bigger infrastructure. So selling your stake as a tour operator, selling your stake to a booking platform in your business, so that then they own, say, a percentage of your business, will require you to keep good books, internal audit, make sure you have your annual audit already ready. When a business comes knocking, saying, we'd like to buy a stake in your business because we've observed you're very good with digital marketing, we're seeing you very visible, you need to be ready. As a tour operator, you cannot be caught not ready. When somebody knocks and wants a stake in your business, you should be able to say, this is how much it costs. This is how much I can give you. So that way you expand the market. Next slide. How will nations share the market? So I've talked about regional integration, but for me, I don't see sharing the market as a stakes issue. I see it more as a collaborative endeavor to expand and enlarge in the market. So regional integration doesn't result in competition, in my view. In our view at Saffir, it expands the market and allows for more players to gain. Firstly, beyond just enabling, the first thing obviously is free movement of people. So again, the AU passport, liberalizing of visas and access between countries so that intra-Africa trade and tourism thrives. The second thing is financial integration, a very important factor, so that capital flows more freely across the regions. Then you can increase the likelihood of partnerships between countries and for cross-marketing of products. I mean, you should be able to say, I want to first start my Serengeti, I want to start my visit with Serengeti and then go to the Mara. So it should be easy for you to just move as a Tanzanian and come to Kenya and enjoy the migration from the Kenyan side as well. Additionally, I see domestic retail buyers in the ASOS region, this is the Africa South of Sahara region, being able to it becoming more important for them to convert and pay in their local currency first. So having platforms for payment, I've seen one like Rave or Flutterwave that allows you to pay in Kwacha for travel in Kenya. So you shouldn't have to convert into dollars first. You should just convert your Kwacha into Kenya shillings and pay for your travel and come. So that will be more important, so that as part of enhancing e-commerce and so that travel in general is easier and booking of travel is easier. So, and retail products need to be have more bespoke payments. So for instance, a Zambian might have been wanting to come to Kenya for a long time. How can they pay slowly for a particular package that will get them from Kenya into Uganda, into Tanzania, and then back home, you know? So can they pay slowly? So again, it needs e-commerce and travel needs to respond to travelers, different kinds of travelers needs to be able to harness that market. The other thing that is very, very obvious, and this is across Africa, it doesn't matter where, tourism products are products are priced Western facing. So you're thinking of how many dollars you can make out of a German, out of a Frenchman, out of a Norwegian. You're not thinking, how can this product be also affordable to an African from Nigeria, from somebody who's been saving for a long time or who has been thinking of traveling for a long time? So dynamic pricing becomes a very important tool, even for tour operators. So you have your booking platform and you have created your products on there and you have them all nicely visible. How then do you allow people to then, such we don't have that seasonality of travel, because Africans can travel at any time, they're in Africa. Kenyans can travel at any time, they're within Kenya. Dynamic pricing comes into play. This is where you replace that seasonal pricing thing and you just say, I have my products, these are my products I sell all year, my hotel plus excursion. And what happens is as people are booking, then depending on the demand, then the price changes, not because of the season. So it just changes because more people are booking now, or it becomes slightly more expensive or slightly cheaper now. So then people can travel at any time, or when they're able to, or when they know that they can. Then the market also needs to respond with more self-discovery product options. So you want Africans to travel within Africa. They need to feel like it's their home. Africa is their backyard. They need to feel that way. So they need to be able to feel like, I can go to Tanzania and I can hire a guide at a particular leg of the journey. I will need a guide. Can I hire a guide at that point? Can we have products that allow for more self-discovery? Yeah, so you feel you're in your country even when you're in Tanzania, a Nigerian in Tanzania, or a Ghanaian in South Africa. Self-discovery. But also there's something else that Africans and the Africa market has not taken advantage of. We're segmenting the market to include previously ignored categories. This is people like scientific researchers, historians, archaeologists, or people who are interested in particular archaeological sites. So we're segmenting the market to include such things. Somebody might want to visit Olduvai and then visit the Turkana Boy, and then visit somewhere in Tanzania that's also considered a cradle of mankind, and another one in Ethiopia. Those are products in themselves, and in between you can have other things happening. So having multi-country Africa of South of the Sahara museum passes, National Archive passes. So if a student is coming to do research in another area, they can have multiple passes to the museum in Tanzania, the main museum in Kenya, the new museum in Ethiopia, the main museum in Rwanda, and they can have access to all these things. And that becomes an impetus for them to travel to those next countries and spend there. So resegmenting the market is very important so that it's not just leisure. Religious pilgrimage products are missing from Africa. We have religious sites, we do. We have Lalibela in Ethiopia. We have the churches, the interesting churches in Uganda. In East Africa, here in Nairobi, we have the Shrine of Our Lady. There are people who are interested in those products. In Marsabit, you have the shrine up on the hill. That's also an interesting artistic sort of, as much as it's a religious site, it's also an artistic, it can be consumed artistically as you go further north into Marsabit to see other things. So we're segmenting the market to create interesting products and interesting routes that allow people to see more of each country as they go. So another area that's underrated is shared cultural and historical heritage. Africa has its colonial history. We have a shared colonial history with Nigeria, for instance, because the British were here, the British were there. But what is it about Nigeria that's historically interesting in relation to that is also in Kenya? So packaging those aspects also. So looking at new segments of the market to sell is another way to harness brand Africa and the connections between countries. Those threads need to be stitched so that then you can have something to sell across Africa. Then management of competition. I know we keep thinking about competition, but if you then allow the free flow of people, what happens is capital follows, ideas follow, cultural representations change and morph and become more interesting. And so there'll be no shortage of ideas. So we shouldn't worry so much about managing competition or worrying about competition. Once you open up those blockages, then other things follow. So then the market grows. Next slide. Now, an example of growth of, again, the Ninkananka Trail in Gambia is a very good example. This actually was launched before the pandemic, just slightly before the pandemic struck in 2020. So this was a self-discovery kind of, it has both the angle of self-discovery. So you can hire a guide and enjoy a river cruise, or you can just discover it yourself. You know, border, local transport, asking direction and that kind of thing. But what you know now, it's there and there's a story around it. So this is how you can resegment the market, a small market like Gambia with a great product like this. imagine what this kind of product would be for, say, along the Nile, from the source of the Nile all the way into Uganda, into Egypt. Imagine what that could mean for an African sort of product. Imagine what that could be for the Zambezi, the Limpopo. Yeah, so scaling up this kind of products that allow for self-discovery, but with the option to have a guide and enjoy the sites. So I think that was actually a really good example of what self-discovery can be. Next slide. Political goodwill. Oh, where do we begin with this? It's political goodwill. There's first the homegrown political goodwill. The first thing I'd like to say about this is all African countries first need to put tourism and the environment aspect into one docket, into one ministerial docket. They cannot be separate. The two should always go together. I know in Kenya, we've placed tourism separate as a ministry on its own with wildlife, but both wildlife and tourism should be together with the ministry that manages environment, because that is one ministry. The two are inextricably linked. Now, when you look at from the COMESA EAC SADC space, we started first with the free trade area in 2008. It felt a bit wishy-washy because, again, whenever we come to these forums as African countries, we still have our selfish nationalistic views and thinking, which kind of can be a blinder in many ways. Again, that one was like all other agreements and grant schemes. It was characterized by weak legal institutional foundations. And again, that's one of them is that separating tourism, wildlife, and environment. That's already weakening brand Africa. That's a weakness. I don't know how to explain it, but it's a weakness, a major weakness. So too many rules. Each region has its own rules. We need to sit down and say, what are the commonalities for each country? What is common between us and Zambia, Kenya and Zambia? What is common between Zambia and Gambia? Then work with those commonalities to create something that can create, a unified brand. Otherwise, what we are seeing is really a lack of seriousness and commitment. Then in 2020, we saw the launch of the Africa Free Trade Area. What it has been, or rather what's going to happen with the Africa Free Trade Area is we'll see an elimination and a reduction of tariffs and non-tariff barriers between the 54 countries that agreed to be part of this body or this agreement. But tourism, being largely a service industry, has a very big opportunity to take up whatever is agreed faster than, say, manufacturing and other areas for export. So what needs to happen, again, going back to the tour operator bodies and the tourism bodies, the various little fragments of tourism, they need to come to the table with policymakers and say, these are our challenges. This is where we see if you fix this, then it will work for us. So that then they can these people need to be informed by us. We're the ones in the industry. We're the ones who know where it hurts, where it pinches. We need to sit with them and tell them, this is where it hurts. This is where we need you to fix. Otherwise, they won't know. Then we've had the AU launched the Single Africa Air Transport Market, which is a major step towards opening up the skies and making air travel easier, but it hasn't quite been taken up because, well, infrastructure has to be built also to allow for that. The next step will be a single customs union and then the common market. And again, these are things that will benefit us. So you can see regional bodies are becoming attuned to the needs of the new concept of regionalism. It still needs a bit of administrative and transactions and a lot of thinking and doing action. Things like reducing transaction costs across borders, overcoming market segmentation and fragmentation. Those will come slowly, but they can happen. But again, it needs to be a bottom-up approach. We can't wait for them. We have to tell them what we need. Yeah, we can't wait them to do something about something and then we follow. We have to go to them and tell them these are the places, these are the pinching points, and this is what we need you to do for us. Next slide. Thank you very much. Thank you for this opportunity to present to you. I tried to keep.
Velma, did you get muted? Did you mute yourself?
I probably did. Now I have unmuted, but I was saying thank you.
Yes.
I was saying thank you for the opportunity to present. And I hope I have kind of ignited something or sparked something in everybody's mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Velma. Yes, you have. You have enlightened all of us around all the key issues related to harnessing opportunities for a brand Africa. You have raised all the pertinent questions around these key issues. How I wish there were as many policymakers in this gathering today that we could have picked this. But like we have talked earlier, we have an opportunity to work together to pick up some of these things that you mentioned that are very pertinent, that we can carry them forward in discussions and other forums. I couldn't even begin to summarize. Very insightful, like we have seen comments in the chat, very, very insightful, very eye-opening, the issues that we don't even think about when we talk about the African brand. And I hope that the Africa Tourism Association becomes as active to take on some of these things, because it's going to 4 years, and all we have is a name and a website. And the industry in Africa is not even aware. I believe more than half the industry is not even aware that the Africa Tourism Association exists and what it does. So therein lies the first challenge. Now, at this point, I would like to ask our speakers. I will try and pick out some questions, but I would like to ask our speakers who are still here. I think Rose has left. She had another engagement, but she'll join later. But she says there's somebody who can answer the questions in the audience, and that is Lina Mukogo. So Lina, if anything comes out about the climate-friendly travel, Rose says you can take these questions on her behalf. Also, Dr. Anne-Kathrin has left. There were 2 questions earlier on for her. She said she will be happy to answer this later in this program or by email. But on the question of biodiversity index, she says these are not fully developed. But any other questions that come up, I will take them on her behalf, and she'll be able to answer differently. So we now have Dr. Julia and Velma, who are still here and are available to take questions. So we will have questions for the next 15 minutes. And I think we can start with Julia. I hope you have picked your questions, but if you haven't, I think there's somebody who asked a question around whether pledges will decrease tourism demand by curtailing tourist freedom of choice. So can visitor pledges curtail or decrease tourism demand where these pledges are? And my question, I didn't see another question, but I'll pick it up. My question is, can individual private companies develop visitor pledges for their clients where there are no countrywide destination pledges? Thank you, Dr. Julia.
Okay, thank you very much, Judy. Regarding the first question, can visitor pledges decrease tourism demand? I think the short answer is yes. And I think that some destinations may even choose this as a strategy to address and target certain visitors with shared interests. So for example, with the quote that I showed you, that someone in the interviews with Destination Palau said that they were using the pledge to attract like-minded visitors, that implicit in this is almost an attempt to demarket the destination to people who would not behave in a certain way. So in some ways, yes, I agree. This is almost built into the idea of the pledge, that the destination communicates what kind of visitor, what kind of behavior it wants, thereby suggesting that if people would rather behave differently, to perhaps go elsewhere. And I mean, COVID has potentially, we don't know that conclusively yet, COVID may have changed some of this, but up until 2019, we did have a lot of destinations globally that would very happily say, we don't mind having fewer visitors. So, or perhaps different kinds of visitors with different interests, different behaviors, and so on. So I do think that pledges can be used to target markets very specifically as well. About your question, Judy, about pledges are something that can be used by individual businesses, I think that the answer to this would probably be a yes. I can't think of an example off the top of my head right now where a business has done this. It would probably need to be built into their marketing in a sense that customers, visitors, clients would need to be aware early on in the decision-making process whether that is something that they would wish to engage in. But I can see how, for example, certain types of resorts, perhaps in nature-based tourism comes to mind, cultural tourism comes to mind, where this may be a promising thing to do, but I haven't come across it yet.
Okay, all right, good to know. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's good to know that you can actually use visitor pledges to demarket and just attract the right kind of visitors that you want for a particular place. Amata, I hope that answers your question on decreasing visitors' interests and choices. Velma, there's a question for you from Mordecai. Have you seen it? It's on the chat. It's the latest on the chat. You have to unmute yourself.
I'm going to read it out. Can the African tourism industry remove itself from wildlife conservation? I feel that this emphasis on wildlife diminishes the importance of African people in this arena. Actually, it's very interesting that we're talking about tourism and wildlife. Last year, we saw the mention that there has not been any poaching in Kenya during the COVID crisis, which was very interesting because it said something. It said, to me, it said that the African people, the Kenyan people, have been the custodians of the wildlife all this time. Somebody else must have been doing the poaching. Yeah, so again, so to say, yes, tourism industry, it's in any case, tourism doesn't depend on I mean, wildlife doesn't depend on tourism. And that case that I just gave is an example. There were no tourists and there was no poaching. Yeah. So when I say the reason why, I'm trying to find the words to say this, but wildlife has never ever depended on tourism. Never. It was always there. The tourism came afterwards. If you understand the way that those protected areas for wildlife were created, they first belonged to somebody who was doing hunting. then they changed them into national parks and they became protected areas for wildlife. So again, when you look at that history, then you have to remember that they've never been together. It's the other way around. Tourism needs wildlife. Yeah. So yes, tourism industry can remove itself. And even if tourism isn't there, wildlife will continue to thrive. And 2020 was a great example. There was no tourism, but the wildlife continued to thrive. In fact, it thrived even more. We saw worldwide, we saw dolphins coming back to places where people were. It means that wildlife will do better even without tourism. For us, the challenge is, how do we make sure tourism doesn't interfere too much with wildlife, so then wildlife thrives? The other thing that I found out last year also, because I had a lot of time on my hands now, there was not much work happening, I had a lot of time to research. I came across a website by a fellow who was fundraising to go find out if there are other northern white rhinos in South Sudan, where the northern white rhino that died 2 years ago or 3 years ago came from. But the truth is, those rhinos have been there. And they are there. He doesn't need to raise funds to find out at all. He just needs to pick up a phone and call and ask if they've sighted them. So again, you start to see the reality that wildlife in Africa has been there and it's always there until something else interferes with that wildlife. It's not Africans that interfere with the wildlife. So tourism needs to remember and be conscious that wildlife doesn't need tourism, and they should actually be worried that they can be removed from areas that wildlife are. So yes, I agree with Ogada that a lot of times our response to protecting wildlife has meant removing African people, when in fact African people are the ones who are conserving that wildlife and giving it the space it needs and giving it room to thrive. So yes, we should be worried as tourism players that we can be removed from wildlife and that we're not necessary. So we should tread into that space that the wildlife takes with care and reverence, and respect the people who live in those wildlife areas who've been protecting that wildlife already when we come to enjoy it. And African people should remember all the time that they are the original custodians of wildlife. Before the white rhino, the northern white rhino, was nearly decimated, and again, I say in quotes because there's plenty of them elsewhere, maybe not in Kenya, but elsewhere. It was thriving without any interference until a fellow came with a gun. I'm not going to talk about race here, but the truth is he came with a gun. We didn't have guns in Africa. He nearly decimated the entire population of rhinos, the black rhinos, with his gun during that one expedition. So African people should continue to remember that they are the true and the first and the original custodians of wildlife in Africa. That's all I'm going to say about that.
Thank you very much, Mordecai, first for that question, for bringing it up. It is one of those very bold discussions that we must have in Africa, and it's tourism. When we are saying that it is an opportunity to restart tourism, we can't restart tourism with some things sitting under the table. And yes, there are solutions for a good relationship between tourism and wildlife. And we do acknowledge that wildlife conservation does not need tourism. It is tourism that needs wildlife conservation. And I couldn't say it more eloquently than Velma has answered this question with very, very many examples. In another forum a few days ago, I was in a place in a discussion where there was talk about re-Africanizing tourism. And re-Africanizing tourism was about some of the things that Velma has said about creating experiences and products for the market, but it was also about the narratives around the places, how we use foreign languages in marketing, how our pricing, you've just talked about dynamic pricing. Why would we have a price? There were questions in this forum. Why are the prices in US dollars and not in Zambian kwacha, for example, by African operators? If you are targeting a South African market, why aren't you giving them your goods in rand? So there are these are discussions that are not often coming to the fore, but we need to have them if we are going to rebuild a resilient tourism sector. We must be open to have all these discussions. So there's another question from Harriet Akinyi, and Harriet is asking, are there indigenous African solutions when it comes to sustainable tourism? And are there African practices that can be incorporated to show that a property follows a sustainable tourism path? I have some observations, but I would like Velma to probably take on this. Velma, you're muted again.
I'm still getting used to this online conferencing. Sorry, what was the question?
Sorry, it's on the chat, Velma, and it's asking Harriet.
Harriet, hold on, I'm just scrolling up to see the question.
The last one on the chat.
The last one, huh? Oh, yes. I'm just going to read it out for my own consumption. Let me ask, are there indigenous solutions that comes to sustainable tourism? Are there African practices that can be incorporated to show that a property follows a sustainable path? Okay, that's interesting. Yes, well, I've seen it in vernacular architecture around, in the north especially. If you ever go to the north, Turkana, Marsabit, please do not ever sleep in any stone-built house, you will suffer. So if you want to sleep comfortably throughout your stay and enjoy being in the north, sleep in the semi-built huts, the dome-shaped huts. So yes, that's one way. That's a solution for a property to adopt, depending on where they are in Africa. If you have a property and you're starting to start a resort in, say, in the desert in Marsabit or in Turkana, consider vernacular architecture. And there's so many examples, especially along Lake Turkana on both the eastern and the western shores. You will see perfect examples. You can modify them here and there if you want to add a bathroom. Elias Springs is one particular example. They have built their units, their manyak, they call them bombers. They're little bombers thatched with the local reed from the lake. And part of the house, part of the building, halfway is built of clay and from the lake and soil that's compacted. And so you have a nice shower and a bathroom in there. So yes, there are so many brands that have adopted African practices and local vernacular lessons to create a product that will be enjoyable to people visiting. Another example is in Marsabit, the fellow who owns Palm Spring has created a combination of the thatch on the top and a cement structure in the middle and the bottom. And it is so comfortable. I slept in both and I experienced more comfort in the other unit, the one that combines vernacular architecture with modern. So yes, there are African practices that can be adopted. On sustainability, I don't know how that's sustainable, but I've seen those houses over the last 6 years and they're still standing. So I imagine they're sustainable with good repairs and care. So yes, Harriet, there are solutions in indigenous Africa for every property to copy or to mimic for success.
Sorry, thank you, Velma. There is also issues of food and entertainment that can be incorporated in tourism from the local cultures, making available the food the way it is made locally, appreciating local entertainment in the time and season when it is appropriate, can be one way of incorporating. So not having a death song performed for guests just because they can't understand the language in terms of a good harvest, instead of having a good harvest song, or making people perform a war song when it is not time for preparing for war. So there is also respect. Anytime we respect culture and incorporate that respect in our offers and experiences, we are actually applying local cultures and the solutions that there are for sustainable tourism. I also always like to mention that sustainability and conservation did not start with the modernity, whatever we call modernity, or with the West. If you listen to a lot of African stories and folklore, there's a lot of it that talks about relationship with wildlife. And the relationship with wildlife was defined very clearly, whether it was around myths around certain animals, which enabled the protection of these animals, because they were either sacred or they were also used to expound certain values in society. So there's always been a relationship with wildlife, and we find a lot of it. If those can be translated into what you're calling African solutions, and I always say, yes, there are African solutions to sustainable tourism and sustainability. The language of sustainability is not foreign to Africa. We did not call it sustainability, but definitely in our interactions, in our consumption patterns, even the way we had respect for certain plants, and it is only certain people who could access them, whether for medicines or other things. There was a relationship with nature, and this was about controlling consumption. The Maasai pastoralists are a good example of this. They always had something they called the olkeri, which is the place where they would take their animals in drought times. And when there was good rains and pasture, no one was allowed to go. This was sustainable management of land. So the whole concept of sustainability is not foreign to the African culture. It is not something that needs to be taught to the Africans. It's something that needs to be acknowledged the way that we have done it in the past. That is just an add-on. Professor Marina,
to add to what you
would like to ask a question, Velma. So as you answer, Professor Marina, what is your question? It's not written here.
I found it easier just to ask quickly the question verbally rather than writing. Thanks, Velma, for the presentation. Very insightful and interesting. My question is a bit provocatory, as my usual. For many years pre-pandemic, we've been focusing on questions such as, is Africa China ready? Right? China ready, so accommodating a large proportion of the international market, primarily looking at the Asian market. Now, my question is Africa ready? Because you raised some really interesting points about the solution, Africa-based solution, like the thatch hat, the traditional thing, that. But I'm going to recall and refer to a personal experience. When I was used to travel in Africa with my ex-husband, who is from Nigeria, I remember him being extremely distraught by my willingness to go into the wilderness and going into, in the bushes and camping and doing all these very natural-based activities. So my controversial question is trying to understand whether there are sufficient evidence that show us that there is a demand for a certain type of tourism product that we are assuming are Africa ready. But from my experience of researching the African market recently, there is the emergence of very different typologies and needs emerging from the market, which I think we should address as quickly as possible, which has been what we've been doing recently, you know, at time of crisis, with the price structure, the way you suggested about how prices are offered and things like that. But I wanted to have your insight in, you know, answering as much as you can to the question, is Africa ready?
You are muted, Velma.
Thank you for your question. Thank you for your question, Marina. But absolutely, Africa is not ready for Africa. It's not. Like I said, visa access, for me to get a visa. I remember one time, I'll just give an anecdote here. We traveled with a group of journalists to South Africa. So we had Gambians, we had Malians, we had Zimbabweans, we had some from South Africa, and myself from two of us from East Africa, one Ugandan and one Tanzanian. So we had all these people together. And so our landing point was Johannesburg, of course. And then we were going to go by road to Swaziland for a festival that we were covering. And our experience for the Gambians was very, very taxing. The Gambians and the Malians could not easily get a visa to cross because there's no consulate in South Africa for them to do that, or there's no easy way for them to do that. Some of them even have to travel to a neighbor, I think Nigeria. They have to travel to Nigeria to get their visa to come to Kenya. So yes, Africa is not ready. We still view each other's citizens with suspicion. There's this, in South Africa, they have this idea of Nigerians as criminals. Zimbabweans are taking over in some way. Well, Zimbabweans are very educated, so they find it easy to navigate South Africa easily. Of course, there's a language barrier is smaller. South Africans view Kenyans with suspicion because our passport is considered weak, because a lot of we're in a region, we're in the middle of a conflict region, basically the Great Lakes region, and so a lot of people use our passport to then get to South Africa as their final destination, and that has been a contentious issue for a long time. But with liberalized visas, as we do have with Ethiopia, between Kenya and Ethiopia, it's visa free. In fact, we have a lot of Ethiopians living here and doing business here, and vice versa. With the liberalized visa system, you should be able to then have maybe a third-party visa body in every country that then vets citizens for access to other African countries. I'm not sure, I don't have all the answers, but it's still a question that is also very important to me to be answered. I don't know who is going to answer it for me, but the short answer is we are not. We are not ready for each other. Product-wise, we are also not very knowledgeable about what, say, Tanzanians want in Kenya. I'm very aware, because I'm in the marketing field, I'm very aware that Ugandans already come for medical tourism in Kenya, Rwandans the same, and people from the DRC as well. So their need, there's the necessity aspect, and then there's the touristic leisure aspect. We still haven't got data, and I'd love to see the data that you have around that. So I have data for Kenya and what Kenyans want, but I don't know what Rwandans want in Kenya, for instance. I don't know what Kenyans want in Rwanda. I don't know what Ugandans want in Kenya as far as leisure is concerned. I know they come to Aga Khan Hospital, Nairobi Hospital, Kijabe Hospital for treatment because the healthcare is better here. But as far as leisure travel and just consuming tourism, there's not enough data on each other. Not enough to respond to the market in a robust way anyway.
Thank you everyone for this very insightful morning session. We have almost eaten into your break because we're starting the next session at 2. We will continue with some of these discussions if they become relevant at 2 o'clock. But I hope this has been worth your while. These discussions are being recorded, and for those who are registered, you will be able to have access to the recorded versions of these sessions. Once again, thank you very much for being here. To all our speakers, we value your time, your engagement, and for enlightening us this morning as we all look forward to ways of building a resilient tourism industry, first and foremost for Africa. Then the rest of the world can come and enjoy this. Just like Velma said, I love that statement. I always use it. Good places to visit must first and foremost be great places for host communities and residents to live in. I leave you with that quote for this morning. We take a break for now, and we see you in just about 40 minutes for the afternoon session. Thank you very much. Bye for now. Bye. Bye, everyone. I look forward to seeing you. Just take a break and check right in just about 2 o'clock. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye for now, everyone. Bye. Thank you for your questions and for your engagement. We hope to see you in the afternoon at 2 o'clock. Bye.